Marcus Dillard was 38 years old when his wife got him fired from the building she didn't know he owned. He had driven himself to her company's holiday party in the same gray Nissan Altima he'd owned for 6 years. He wore the same charcoal blazer he wore to every occasion that required a blazer. A jacket that Sandra had described to her colleagues as something she'd found at a consignment store in a way that landed as a joke and was not one. He had arrived at the Pinnacle Group's 23rd floor offices at the corner of Tryon and 5th in uptown Charlotte with a cup of gas station coffee because Sandra had said the bar didn't open until 7 and he wasn't the type to arrive at a party thirsty. He had stood near the windows. He had watched the Charlotte skyline settle into its evening colors. He had smiled at the people Sandra introduced him to and said the right small words and held his cup and been, by every visible measure, the most unremarkable man in the room. And Sandra, his wife of 7 years, had stood in the center of that room in a dress she hadn't worn home from the store, had laughed at things her director said with the laugh she saved for people she was trying to impress, and had looked across the room at Marcus twice, not to check on him, to locate him the way you locate a piece of furniture you're hoping other people aren't noticing. The thing happened at 8:47. He knew the time because he had checked his watch at 8:45 when the speeches started, and the thing happened 2 minutes into the division VP's remarks about quarterly performance. Sandra had been standing with her manager, a man named Derek Webb, who wore his watch on the outside of his cuff and smiled with every tooth in his mouth. Derek Webb had leaned close to Sandra and said something into the side of her ear, and she had laughed too quickly. And then she had turned and located Marcus near the windows again and made a decision that people who have been watching someone the way Marcus had been watching Sandra for 11 months can see being made in real time. She crossed the room to him, she said, loud enough for the small cluster of colleagues near the window to hear clearly. "Marcus, honey, you have been standing by this window for 45 minutes like the caterer forgot to give you something to do. Are you lost?" The cluster laughed. Not all of it was unkind. Some of it was the nervous laughter of people caught between a moment and their own better judgment. But Derek Webb laughed with both teeth and volume, and Sandra looked back at him when she laughed, which told Marcus everything about the geometry of the room that he hadn't already mapped. He said, "I'm fine, Sandra." She said, "That blazer." And she reached out and touched the lapel, and the gesture was not affectionate. "I keep telling him," she said to the cluster. "He insists on this blazer. 7 years in this blazer." She shook her head. "Some men cannot be helped." More laughter. Derek Webb put his hand briefly on Sandra's shoulder. Marcus looked at his wife. He said, "I'll get some air." He said it the same way he said everything, without elevation, without heat. He set his cup on the window ledge and walked to the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby and rode it down 23 floors in the quiet that had been his companion for 11 months. What none of those people knew, what Sandra did not know, what Derek Webb with his cuff-mounted watch did not know, what the cluster of laughing colleagues at the 23rd floor window of Pinnacle Group headquarters did not know, was that the building they were standing in belonged to Marcus Dillard. So did Pinnacle Group. The email arrived at 11:14 that same night. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. Charlotte, North Carolina had a particular quality in the early morning that Marcus had learned to recognize the way you learn to recognize the weather patterns of a place you've decided to stay in. The light came in low from the east and hit the glass towers of uptown differently in winter than in summer. And in November it arrived at a slant that made the buildings look like they were made of something other than steel and concrete. Something older. He had noticed this the first morning he'd walked the city, 14 years ago, carrying everything he owned in 2 bags and a sum of money his grandmother Ida had left him that had felt enormous and had been, in the context of what it started, a seed. His grandmother had said, when she gave it to him, 2 weeks before she died in her bedroom in Greensboro with the window open because she wanted to hear the birds, "Money is a tool, baby. Tools don't work if you don't pick them up." He had picked it up. He lived in a house in the Enderley Park neighborhood, a 2-story Craftsman on Tuckasegee Road that he had bought 11 years ago for reasons that had nothing to do with what he could afford, and everything to do with the neighborhood it sat in, which was the kind of neighborhood that contained people doing the specific work of living without an audience for it. He had put in the kitchen himself, not because he couldn't hire someone, because the kitchen was the kind of work he needed to do with his hands, needed to understand from the inside, needed to finish at the end of a day and be able to look at and say, "That is a thing I built, and it is sound." He had laid the tile on the back porch the same way, one Saturday in March 3 years ago, while Sandra was at her mother's, and when she came home, she had said it looked nice without asking when he'd learned to tile, which had told him something he had filed and not acted on because he was still hoping it was wrong. He wore canvas work pants most days and drove the Altima and bought his coffee from the place on Remount Road where the owner, a woman named Berta, had been making the same cup for 22 years and charged $2.50 and did not intend to change either thing. He walked into the office when he had office business in a different car, which he kept in the parking deck on Church Street. And he wore different clothes, which he kept at the office, and he moved through the Pinnacle Group headquarters the way a man moves through a building he has always known, without announcement, without performance, with the specific economy of someone for whom the building is a tool and not a stage. He had started Pinnacle Group 14 years ago in a shared workspace on South Boulevard with his first investor capital, a logistics contract he'd spent 6 months chasing, and the particular stubbornness of a man who has been underestimated so many times that he has stopped registering it as an event. He had grown it across a decade into a commercial real estate and development firm with holdings in 7 states, a construction subsidiary, a property technology company, and a hospitality division that operated 11 boutique hotels along the mid-Atlantic coast. The current private valuation was $30 billion. His name was in the founding documents and in the ownership records and nowhere else, by design, because Marcus Dillard had made the decision early, when Pinnacle was 3 people in a shared workspace, that the company would be the front and he would be the interior. And that decision had held through 14 years and 3 economic cycles and 2 near-catastrophic market corrections that he had navigated by being exactly as calm as he appeared at all times and significantly better prepared than anyone who'd read his biography would have predicted. He had met Sandra at a fundraising dinner for a housing nonprofit in the 4th year of building Pinnacle, when he was eating catered chicken at a folding table and trying to determine whether the man 2 seats over was the city council member he needed to meet or merely someone who looked like him. Sandra had been at the same table. She had known immediately which man was the council member and had told Marcus without being asked because, she said, she had a talent for identifying who people were by how they held their forks. He had laughed at this, genuinely, and she had laughed back, and she had been funny and sharp and had looked at him in his regular shirt at a folding table as though looking at someone who might be worth knowing. He had been right to love her for 2 years, without reservation. The reservation had begun 3 years in, with her promotion at Pinnacle Group's marketing division, which she had applied for without knowing the company's ownership structure, and had been hired on merit by a hiring committee that reported to a division head that reported eventually, through 3 management layers, to Marcus. He had not intervened. He had not mentioned it. He had told himself it would either not matter or it would matter in ways he could not anticipate. And in either case, the right move was stillness and watchfulness and the patient accumulation of information. In the 3 years since her promotion, Sandra had been promoted again to senior director. Her salary had grown. Her sense of herself had grown with it. And the Okafor family, her mother Miriam, her father Clifton, her older sister Janelle, had grown with her sense of herself, inflating around her success like a weather system feeding on warm air, until the Sandra at the kitchen table was a different woman from the one who had known which man was the council member and told him, without being asked. The red flags had been arriving for 11 months. A new perfume she hadn't mentioned buying. A phone that had begun to find reasons to face away from him. Absences in the evenings that generated explanations that were slightly more detailed than they needed to be, which was the specific signature of a fabrication assembled in advance and delivered with the care of something that cannot afford to be questioned. He had watched all of it with the same quality of attention he applied to a quarterly earnings report, complete, undistorted by preference, sorted by weight and frequency. He had not said anything. He was not a man who said things before he knew everything. The payoff detail had been in place for 4 months, a backup to the company's security system that routed incident footage directly to the owner's administrative account. He had installed it after a theft issue in the lobby 2 years ago and had never updated the routing because it had never given him cause to. He had not thought about it in connection with Sandra. He had not thought about it at all until 11:14 on the night of the holiday party. The email arrived from the company's automated security system with the subject line, Incident Report, Floor 23, No 14, 2047. He was sitting at the kitchen table with his grandmother Ida's photograph in front of him, the one from the garden in Greensboro, the one where she was holding a trowel and laughing at something outside the frame. He had brought it home from the office that evening, as he did every evening, because Ida had taught him not to leave the people you love and places you lock up at night. He opened the email. The security system had flagged it because an employee had been identified in a non-work area common space in a manner that triggered the conduct monitoring protocol. The attachment was 47 seconds of footage from the window bay camera on the 23rd floor, timestamp 2047. He watched it once. His hands did not shake. They had not shaken when his first company nearly collapsed in the 3rd year, and they had not shaken during the 18 months of litigation with a contractor who had tried to steal the South Boulevard property from under him. And they did not shake now. He watched Sandra touch his lapel and say the thing about the blazer and turned back to Derek Webb, and he watched Derek Webb's hand on her shoulder, and he watched himself set down the cup and walk to the elevator with the unremarkable calm of a man who has not yet understood the full picture. He had understood the full picture. He understood it better now. He opened a second browser tab and pulled up the company's HR records through the owner's portal and entered Derek Webb's employee number. He found what he had half anticipated finding. The system showed 14 after-hours badge-ins on the 23rd floor over the past 6 months. 8 of them had a matching badge-in for Sandra Dillard. He cross-referenced the dates against Sandra's calendar, which she had linked to the household shared account 3 years ago for scheduling purposes and had not thought to unlink. 8 evenings described as team meetings and client prep. None of them had a matching calendar entry from anyone else on her team. $43,200. That was the amount by which Sandra's discretionary expense account had been overdrawn in reimbursements over the last 8 months. Expenses approved in her own name as senior director, run through a division budget that rolled up to his company. Not theft, precisely, but not right. He did not forward the footage. He did not send any messages. He opened one folder on his desktop, a folder he had created 11 months ago, and had been adding to quietly, with the patience of a man who does not move until he knows where he is going, and he added 3 items to it. Then, he made one call. Raymond Osei answered on the second ring. Raymond had been Marcus's attorney for 11 years. He was 61, bald in a way that looked intentional, and operated from an office on South Tryon in a building Marcus owned and that Raymond paid market rent for because Raymond had insisted on it from the beginning, which was one of the reasons Marcus had chosen him. "I need you in the office at 7, Marcus said. Raymond said, "I'll be there at 6:45. Marcus ended the call. He looked at the photograph of Ida in the garden. She had told him once, the summer he was 17, and had gotten into a fight with a boy at school that had resolved nothing and cost him a week's suspension. The ones who move fast when they're angry arrive empty-handed. You want to arrive holding everything. He had remembered it every time since. 3 days passed. Raymond reviewed everything on the Thursday morning. He sat across from Marcus in the conference room on the 9th floor. Not the executive suite, the working room, the one with the whiteboard and the rolling chairs. And he went through the folder with the focused attention of a man who has spent 40 years reading documents and can extract the relevant weight from a page in 11 seconds. He looked at the badge records and the expense reconciliation and the security footage and the 11 months of cross-referenced calendar data, and he was quiet for a long moment. "She doesn't know," Raymond said. "No," Marcus said. "That you own it." "No." Raymond set the papers down. He stopped. He was not a man who editorialized. He returned to lawyer mode. The expense overdraws are a problem. In isolation, they're a civil matter. Combined with the conduct issue and the organizational relationship, what's the exposure? To her? Significant. Raymond picked up his pen. "The question is what you want to happen." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "A clean accounting," he said. "That's all." Raymond made a note. Tools were meant to do the work they were made for, not the work you were feeling when you picked them up. By Friday morning, Raymond had pulled in a forensic accounting team, a woman named Sylvia Park from a firm in Ballantyne who had handled 3 of Marcus's previous corporate matters, and who had the specific quality of someone who treats numbers with the seriousness of testimony. Sylvia confirmed the expense irregularities and identified a pattern: 14 over-approvals over 8 months, all under the threshold that triggered automatic audit review, all approved by Sandra in her capacity as senior director. Not a sophisticated scheme, but a consistent one. That same afternoon, Marcus called Lawrence Webb, no relation to Derek, who was Pinnacle Group's head of HR, and asked for a meeting. Lawrence was a compact, careful man who had been with the company for 9 years and who had never asked Marcus unnecessary questions, which was one of his best qualities. He came to the 9th floor, sat down, and Marcus walked him through the scenario without naming the employee. When the scenario was complete, Lawrence looked at the table for a moment. "This is the kind of thing," Lawrence said, "that resolves best before it escalates." "I agree," Marcus said. "You'll want independent HR counsel, already retained." Lawrence nodded. "And the senior director in question?" "Will be handled directly," Marcus said. "I'll need you to prepare the separation documentation." "Standard protocol." Lawrence said. "When?" Marcus said. "Monday." That evening, he drove home in the Altima. He let himself into the house on Tuckasegee Road. Sandra was in the kitchen, reheating something, her back to the door. He said, "Hey," in the same voice he used for everything. She said, "There's pasta, if you want it," without turning around. He said thanks. He sat at the table. He asked about her day. She told him about a meeting that had run long and a presentation she was preparing. She did not mention the holiday party. She did not mention Derek Webb. She ate her pasta, and he ate his, and the kitchen he had tiled himself in March 3 years ago was quiet around them, and full of the specific temperature of a house in which something has already been decided, and only one person in it knows. She kissed his cheek before she went upstairs. He sat at the table a little while longer with Ida's photograph, and did not feel righteous, and did not feel angry. He felt the specific grief of a man who had confirmed what he had hoped to be wrong, which was different from both those things. The Monday morning meeting happened at 9. Marcus was in the building by 6:15, in his working clothes, a clean collared shirt, good slacks, shoes that were not the shoes of the Altima and the blazer and the gas station coffee, but were the shoes of a man who owned the floor his feet were on. He had breakfast brought up from the lobby cafe. He worked through his inbox. At 8:50, he called Diana, his chief of staff, who had been with him for 8 years and who had seen him arrive in every weather, and had learned to read the specific temperature of a Marcus Dillard arrival with the accuracy of a woman who takes her work seriously. She said, "Raymond and Sylvia are in Conference B. Lawrence is in his office." He said, "Have them come up at 9. And I need you to send Sandra Dillard the 9 o'clock calendar invite. Subject, organizational review." Diana was quiet for 2 seconds. "Done," she said. He said, "One more thing. When she arrives at the building this morning, don't give her any indication. Just route her to the 23rd floor as normal. Raymond will handle the rest from the lobby." "Understood," Diana said. She had no idea that the man she had dressed down at her own company's party, in front of her own colleagues, the man in the consignment store blazer with the gas station coffee, had been the reason she had a company to work for. Sandra arrived at 9:04. She came through the lobby in the fitted wool coat she saved for client meetings and good impressions. She badged through the turnstile. She did not see Raymond Osai standing near the elevator bank, because Raymond had the specific quality of a tall, bald, 61-year-old man in a good suit, who looks as though he belongs to whatever building he is standing in, and always has. He said, "Miss Dillard, I'm Raymond Osai. I'm the general counsel for Pinnacle Group. We have a 9 o'clock with the owner's office. I'll walk you up." She stopped. "I have an organizational review at 9. "That's correct," Raymond said. 27th floor. She had never been to the 27th floor. Most Pinnacle Group employees hadn't. The 27th floor was not on the company's standard floor map. It was the ownership and executive operations level, and it looked nothing like the 23rd. The elevator opened into a reception area with wide windows and the kind of quiet that expensive buildings build into their top floors. The quiet of good insulation and structural soundness and the deliberate removal of anything unnecessary. Raymond led her to the conference room on the south side. Marcus was already there. He was standing at the window when she came in. He was wearing the shoes and the shirt and the slacks, and he looked the way he looked up here, completely himself, which was a different thing than the way he looked at her company's holiday party, because he was not performing a version of himself for anyone's benefit. He was simply present, the way a man is present in a room he has always occupied. Sandra stopped inside the door. Raymond Osei took a seat to Marcus's left. Sylvia Park was at the end of the table with a folder. Lawrence Webb sat near the window. She looked at Marcus, and there was a moment, she knew his face better than anyone's, where she almost said something that had nothing to do with business. Almost said, "What is this?" Almost said, "What are you doing here?" But the room arranged the question differently before it reached her mouth. "Sit down, Sandra," Marcus said, not unkindly. The same voice. She sat. "I'm going to show you some things," he said, "and I'd like you to look at them completely before anyone speaks." Raymond opened the folder and slid the first document across the table. It was the corporate ownership structure of Pinnacle Group, the founding papers, the equity distribution, the ownership trust. At the top, under founder and principal owner Marcus A. Dillard, she looked at it for a long time. Sylvia Parks slid the next document. The forensic accounting summary, 14 expense overdraws across 8 months, $43,200, with the approval signatures highlighted. The next document was the badge record cross-reference. 14 after-hours entries, 8 overlapping with Sandra's own badge log. The last document Raymond produced was a printed still from the security footage. Time-stamped 2047. Sandra touching Marcus's lapel. Sandra turned toward Derek Webb. She had no idea, when she reached for that lapel at her company holiday party, that the 47 seconds that followed were already in her employer's security system, already time-stamped, already addressed to the inbox of the man standing in front of her now. She looked at the photograph for a long moment. Then she looked at Marcus. "How long?" she said. 14 years, he said. "I built it before we met." She pressed her hand over her mouth briefly and lowered it. "You never said." "No," he said. She looked around the table. The documents were laid out in front of her in a row, clear and unhurried, the way you lay out the parts of a thing you have disassembled so that every component can be seen without confusion. "This is..." She started. She looked at Marcus. "Did you know? Before the party." "I knew enough," he said. The party confirmed the rest. She looked at the expense summary. "The money will be addressed in the separation agreement," Raymond said. "The company is not pursuing criminal referral. The resolution is a full repayment schedule and a non-disclosure agreement. Your independent attorney will need to review the terms." "I have an attorney," she said. She said it to Marcus. "I know," he said. "We contacted her this morning. She has the documents." Sandra looked at the table. The documents were still in their row. She was not crying. She was doing the thing people do when the architecture of their understanding shifts at the foundation and the adjustment moves through them slowly from the base up. "Derek," she started. Lawrence Webb said, "Without editorial, Mr. Webb's employment with Pinnacle Group was terminated this morning, effective immediately. He has been notified." She was quiet. Marcus had stood through the entire meeting. He sat down now, across from her, and when he spoke his voice was what it had always been, measured and without performance, the voice of a man who had located the center of the situation and was speaking from it. "I'm not doing this to punish you," he said. "I want you to understand that. The marriage is over. We've been over it longer than this morning, and I think you know that. The company matters are a separate thing from the marriage. Both need to be resolved cleanly." She looked at him. Her face had shed the practiced social expressions she had been wearing since her promotion, the ones she'd learned to wear for rooms she was trying to impress, and what remained was something closer to the woman at the fundraising table who had known which man was the council member. "You loved it," she said. "All of this. Not for what it is. You loved building it." "Yes," he said, "and I called you." She stopped. She did not say the words she had used at the holiday party. She did not say any of the words from any of the rooms. Marcus looked at her steadily. "The things you said about me in those rooms," he said, "weren't about me. They were about who you'd become in rooms that asked you to be someone else. I watched it happen. I was sorry to watch it happen." He picked up the pen beside him and uncapped it and set it on the signature page of the separation document that Raymond had placed in front of her. "Take the weekend," he said. "Your attorney has everything. Whatever she recommends, that's what you should do." He stood. And he said, in the same voice that had said, "I'm fine." "Sandra at the 23rd floor window, and thanks at the kitchen table, and good morning to 300 mornings in the house on Tuckasegee Road. I want you to be okay. That hasn't changed. But I need you to understand what was here the whole time." He walked to the door. He did not look back at the table. He did not look at the documents, or at Sylvia Park's folder, or at Lawrence's notes. He walked out of the 27th floor conference room with the specific unhurriedness of a man who has placed everything where it belongs and has no further use for the room. Real power operated in quiet rooms. And then it left them. 14 months later, Marcus Dillard sat on the back porch of a house in Dilworth. Different from the Tuckasegee Road house, not larger. Simply different. A house that was his in a way that the Tuckasegee house had become, over 7 years, something else. He had done the back porch himself. He had taken 3 weeks in the spring and laid every stone by hand and built the raised beds along the fence line and planted the things Ida had kept in her Greensboro garden: rosemary, sweet basil, a fig tree that was small now and would be something else in 10 years. He ran Pinnacle Group the same way he had always run it. From the inside, without a sign with his name on it. With Diana managing what needed managing, and Raymond handling what needed to be handled. And the work doing what work does when the foundation is sound. The $30 billion valuation had moved, as it tended to do. He had broken ground on 2 new projects. He had funded a workforce training program for construction trades in the West Charlotte neighborhoods because the labor shortage was a real problem, and solvable problems were his category. He had hired 16 people from the first cohort. The woman he had met at a neighborhood planning meeting in September was named Yvette. She was a landscape architect who had opinions about fig trees and had told him without hesitation that he had planted his too close to the fence and would regret it in 3 years. He had moved it the following weekend. She had not asked him to. She had simply stated the problem and offered to stay and help, and had known which tools he needed because she was the kind of person who showed up useful. He liked her for that, among other things. He had not introduced her to anyone yet. There was time. Sandra had completed the repayment arrangement by month 5, ahead of schedule. Her attorney had negotiated a clean settlement on the marriage, equitable and without spectacle. She had taken a position with a marketing consultancy in Raleigh, smaller than Pinnacle. Honest work. A salary that was hers in a way the Pinnacle salary had not fully been. He had heard this from Raymond, who had handled the final paperwork and kept no further accounting of it. What she had done with the distance from Charlotte and her family's expectations and the particular instrument they had spent years calibrating in her. That was not Marcus's to know. Derek Webb had not found comparable employment in the field. Clifton and Miriam Okafor had called 3 times in the months following the Monday morning meeting. Marcus had not returned any of the calls. There was nothing to say that the situation had not already said more completely. He sat on the porch on a Tuesday evening in October with a cup of coffee. The good kind, not gas station. Not because he had changed his standards, but because Berta on Remount Road had expanded to a second location in Dilworth, 2 blocks from this house. And the cup was still $2.50, and had not changed in any other way either. He sat with Ida's photograph, the garden photograph, on the table beside him, and the evening light doing what it did to the Charlotte skyline from the elevation of this porch, which was a different angle from Tuckasegee, but the same city, doing the same thing with the same light. He looked at the fig tree. It was set right now. In 3 years it would need the fence distance Yvette had identified. In 10 years it would be something that people would see from the alley and stop to look at. He picked up his cup. Some things needed time that other things did not need. The work was knowing the difference and not rushing either one. He drank his coffee. He watched the light. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.